gonna okay, I'm gonna record this now. So last week I thought it'd be good if we just reviewed and just go over it. I don't know how long this will take tonight, but we'll just go through it. And you can see that we basically have covered the books of Genesis through Samuel, first part of First Samuel, I should say. And chapter 1 dealt with creation. We talked about God's perfect creation. By the way, interrupt anytime you want or any comments you have. Or do you have any thoughts before I read the list here? I would like to do more than, I'd like to have interaction. So the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis deal with the creation of the world, the fall of man in Genesis 3, which led to sin and sorrow and death. We're told in Romans, I think it was, Paul wrote, "For by one man sin entered the world, and death through sin," referring to Adam. So the Son of Man, Jesus, came and he brought life. That's a very poor paraphrase of that passage, but that's basically what it says. So we have then the fall of man that led to the flood, Moses and building the ark, and then ultimately the Tower of Babel, when the nations divided and went into other across the world. Genesis 1 through 11, there's a lot of mystery in those 11 chapters. There's a lot of questions that I have that aren't answered, but and out of that comes chapter 2, where Abraham was chosen by God, and the great Abrahamic covenant in Genesis 12, 1 and 2, and where God calls him out. I didn't bring my Bible. I should have a Bible here, shouldn't I? This is a Bible study.
You can borrow mine.
Read Genesis 12, 1 and 2. You got it there? Read that. That's an important covenant in the Old Testament, where God calls Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldees, which is over in Dave Meyer's neck of the woods over there in Iraq and Iran and the Euphrates and all of that.
Genesis chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, "Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing."
I think he goes on in verse 3 that says, read verse 3, that's part of it too. Would you, Russ?
"And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed."
That last phrase is a direct reference to the coming of the Messiah through the offspring of Abraham, and all of the nations of the world be blessed. So he calls Abraham has a son, Isaac. Isaac is, there's not a lot, he's not very memorable, doesn't do many things, but he's in the line where they throughout the Old Testament, they talked about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then Jacob, of course, was the son of Isaac, and from Isaac came, from Jacob came the 12 tribes of Israel. And Jacob's name was changed by God to Israel, and that's where the 12 tribes came, and that was the beginning of the nation. Hence the title, the beginning of the nation building, I should say. One of Jacob's sons, chapter 3, was Joseph, and Joseph was a favorite son of Jacob, and it made his brothers jealous, and so they wanted to kill him, but Reuben, the oldest, said, "No, let's not do that. They put him in a pit. Reuben was gone, and while he was gone, the Ishmaelites, which were the offspring of Abraham, came by and they sold Jacob into slavery, and Joseph. You know what I mean? When I say Jacob, I mean Joseph, and I'm old and confused. So Joseph was sold into Egypt, and he went down there, and ultimately he became second in command to Pharaoh, and through his wise leadership, Israel was saved. There was a great famine in the land. The nation of Jacob and his family went to down to Egypt, and Joseph protected them, and they spent 400 years there. And most of that was in slavery. That was chapter 3. Any thoughts, comments before I move on?
You're doing good.
Thank you. Then God calls Exodus and calls Moses. This has not been a bad day. I played golf this morning. I didn't shoot very well. The weather here is gorgeous. And anyway, so God calls Moses. Moses, first of all, Moses was born in Egypt, and he lived there his early years in the house of Pharaoh, and then but he was always a Jewish person, and ultimately he had to flee Egypt because he killed an Egyptian, and he went out into the wilderness and was there until he was 80 years old, and God came and got him when called him out of a burning bush. Moses argued with God the whole way, didn't want to do it, and I don't blame him. Can you imagine late in life, John, all of a sudden starting a new career that's going to last you 40 years?
No.
You'd have to leave the villages and go and lead a bunch of complainers out into the wilderness. So now you're not 80, I know that.
No.
So, but anyway, God calls him and he goes, and the 10 plagues, the 10th one being the death of the firstborn, which institutes the Passover that they celebrate later, and the Passover, which we celebrate in the Christian church through communion or the Lord's Supper or whatever term you want to use. And that also was a prediction, the prophecy of the coming of the Messiah, who would be the ultimate lamb and would die on the cross for our sins. They go through the Red Sea, the sea parts, manna comes from heaven, and they eat this manna for 40 years. And so that was chapter 4, again, dealt with in Exodus 1 through 15. Chapter 5 deals with the giving of the 10 commandments out Mount Sinai. While Moses is up on the mountain, the children of Israel start complaining, where's Moses? And so they go to Aaron and they make a golden calf, and they were going to worship that. And Moses comes down from Mount Sinai and throws the 10 commandments on the ground, and grinds up the golden calves. And there is a dealing with the people for their rebellion. And also during this period, the instruction for the tabernacle is given, and that leads to the building of the tabernacle, which lasted until the time of Solomon. So I'm not sure how many years that was, but that would have been hundreds and hundreds of years they were in a tent. And that is dealt with in the book of Exodus.
So this was one tabernacle, right?
One tabernacle, right?
And this was the one that had the different.
Had the two rooms.
Chambers,
It had the
yeah.
two rooms. It had the holy place and the holy of holies. Had the outward court. Had special furnishings in it. Yeah. And only the high priest could go into the holy of holies once a year to make atonement for the people. When Jesus died on the cross, there was a curtain between the holy of holies and the holy place in the temple, and it was rent in two. It was torn in two as a sign that Christ's death on the cross had opened that partition so we could go directly to God himself. So we don't have priests that represent us before God.
Is this where the Ark of the Covenant was?
The Ark of the Covenant was with Indiana Jones, and the temple and the Ark. Oh, where was that?
Was it in
The Ark of the Covenant was in the Holy of Holies. Yeah,
in this?
Did they find it?
yeah. Harrison Ford found it. It's in a warehouse somewhere, I think, isn't it? So, yeah,
Oh,
With the monkey brains.
yeah, monkey brains. Yeah,
okay.
we got off track.
Yeah.
But that's good. A little humor is good to see a few laughs there. That's good. So anyway, then after that, they leave, and that generation was a bunch of whiners, and they go out into the land and they complain about everything under the sun, and they've seen, they've seen more miracles than most generations of people, and yet they don't believe God. They saw the Red Sea, they saw the 10 plagues, they saw the provision of manna, they saw water coming from the rock. God made all these provisions for them, and yet they complained. And so God tells them to send in spies into the land of Israel. And they go in there, 12, one from each tribe, and they go in there and they search out the land for 40 days. And they come back, and Jason and Caleb, Joshua and Caleb come back, and they're like, wow, we can do this. This is awesome. You should see this place is full of milk and honey. Did we have that discussion? What is milk and honey?
Yes,
Did we come to the conclusion?
somewhat.
Okay. So anyway, it was a land flowing with milk and honey. The other 10 spies said, we can't do it. There are giants in the land. We need to go back to Egypt. We should just stay where we are. And so God then judges that generation. And then for every day they were in the land, he gives them 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. And until that generation of people had died 20 years and older, which led to the next generation, which takes us to chapter 7. And that is they enter into the land under Joshua. Moses is not allowed to go into the land. He disobeyed God himself and was taken to heaven, quite a punishment. So he was taken to heaven, and Joshua had to deal with these people and go into the land. And they had victory at Jericho. They had defeat at Ai, and they had kind of an up and down existence of conquering the land. They conquered most of it, but they still left some of the nations there, and they ended up causing them problems down the road. Then chapter 8 goes into the time of the judges, and this was a cycle of disobedience. Joshua dies. It's a cycle of disobedience. The people would disobey God. They would be followed by oppression from an outside nation, and then God would hear their cry, and they would be delivered by a judge. Most of the judges were men, but there was Deborah, who was a great judge. And there was a phrase in the book of Joshua, or Judges, I should say, that summed it up. There was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. This was a very tumultuous time. I think it was 400 years too, isn't it? I think so. So then that leads to the story of Ruth, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, the kinsman redeemer. Unfortunately, that was one that we were not able, because we had no internet, we're not able to record. But basically, Ruth was a Moabite woman, and she married her mother-in-law Naomi, and Naomi's husband had 2 sons. And there was a famine in the land during the time of the judges, and they went to the land of Moab, and the 2 boys married 2 Moabite women. One was Orpah, and the other was Ruth. And they all died. All the men died, and so Ruth went back. Naomi went back. She tried to get her 2 daughter-in-laws to stay back in Moab, but Ruth said, no, I'm going to go with you. I'm going to live with you. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. And where you die, I will die. And this is the whole concept of the kinsman redeemer. In the Old Testament, there was this, the custom that if a man died and left a widow, then the nearest of kin would take that widow, and the child of that union would then carry on the inheritance of the dead man. Now, this is something we don't do, and it may sound a little weird to us in our society, but it was important then. And Ruth met Boaz. He was her kinsman redeemer. He married her. She had a son by the name of Obed. Obed had a son whose name was Jesse, and Jesse had a son whose name was David, King David, and ultimately she was in the line of Jesus. And interestingly, too, that Rahab was actually the Rahab of the Joshua story, was the grandmother of Boaz, the mother of Boaz, I think.
The grandmother of, oh,
Yeah, the grandmother of Obed. So, and we talked about what an amazing story that was, how God used these two outside women in his plan of the lineage of David. Everything in the Bible has this perfect plan that God unfolds. And while there's a lot of it that we don't necessarily understand, I don't understand a lot of what goes on, we see this overall thread of the redemption of that God provided for mankind. And then last week we talked about the ending of the Judges. This was the beginning of the kingdom era of Israel. The first king was Saul. He was of the tribe of Benjamin. He was chosen to be king. We talked a lot about the fact that he wasn't really a man of character, and ultimately God rejected his kingdom and chose David, King David, perhaps the greatest king Israel ever had. And we will deal with him, talk about him next week. So that's a summary of the first 10 chapters. Do you have any thoughts or questions that you would like to share?
Thanks for the overview for the ones I missed.
Yeah, cool. I was going to demonstrate to you in my Bible here.
I got a thought.
Yeah.
It's not very enthusiastic.
So this is my Bible before you go any further. This is my Bible, and this is the part we've covered right here. All right. That's the first 10 chapters. Okay. Was that you, Russ?
Yes, sir.
You know, the thing about it, Russ, is I can mute you. So I can mute you and you can talk away all you want. Nobody can hear you, but I'm not going to do that. How do I undo it?
I can mute you too.
What did I do? I can't unmute you.
I am
He's
no
talking.
longer mute. I do know sign language.
Oh, there you go. You're on. You're on. Anyway, go ahead, Russ. I'm sorry.
All
I
right.
should be
You
picking
know,
up.
here in chapter 1, the perfect creation, you ever wonder why? And I have asked this question to myself for a long time, years. And it finally hit me. God laid it upon me not long ago. I got the answer to it. But have you ever wondered, just before I say that, would you ever devise a plan, say you would go into business or you would build something? Why would you ever go in and build something knowing full well it had a design flaw? Would you continue building it? No, you would not.
I'm going to say, you're not the teacher. I don't have to answer.
Stop. Yeah, you would stop and drop back and say, okay, we need to think about this because I see a design flaw here in this. Anyway, I've often thought why God would have creation with a design flaw being the fall of man. And it never made sense to me. And it finally hit me not long ago. And that is, God doesn't want robots. God knew full well that there would be the fall of man. He allowed this. He created it that way because although most of mankind has rejected God and his plan of salvation. He knew that there would be people that would be followers of his son, Jesus Christ. And for that reason and that reason alone, why we have that we're not created as robots, but we are created as human beings that have a mind of our own and a will of our own, and we can decide to follow Jesus or we can flat out reject him. So that's my 2 cents from this nut house.
Well, you nailed it. You absolutely nailed it. He doesn't want robots. He wants us to love him, but you know, who wants to be loved because you're forced to? So yeah,
Right.
Good point. Somebody else? Are you upstairs, Robin?
I am. I'm in the recliner.
I see. So where's Linda?
Right here.
She's off camera tonight.
Okay.
He wouldn't let
She-
me come on.
She just finished exercising.
By the way, I'm reading that book on Homer or Across the Bay. It's very good. Sorry for an
Is it-
inside
isn't it?
baseball. Yeah,
Isn't it awesome?
it is. Yeah. So another thing, let me digress something to, my son Derek bought me an Xbox. So I've been flying the flight simulator, John, and I took off from Homer, from Beluga Lake in a float plane and flew over to Seldovia.
Is that right?
And then I flew
That's-
a Piper Cub up to the head of the bay and tried to land on the beach and flipped it, but I still am okay.
I need one of those.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Anyway, we're getting off course. Sorry.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts, or Dave, where are you?
I'm in New York City.
Oh, okay, cool. You sitting in a bar?
Yep.
A New York bar?
Oh, yeah, it got a Bush Light, of course, which is pathetic, but anyway.
No, Bud Light this time.
Bud
Bud
Light,
Light.
okay. All right, so,
I wanted to say something. The Book of Ruth, I think I've shared as one of my favorite books. And, you know, the fact of the story of the kinsman, the redeemer, and it was Boaz, but, you know, we see there that there's another one, you know, another relative that could have been the one to marry Ruth. But of course, that wouldn't have, you know, followed in God's plan.
wouldn't have been in the plan, yeah.
Because of, you know, and we just see the providence and all those attributes of God.
Did you all hear Bethy?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Okay, well, any final thoughts? Before we say goodbye, this will be up on our YouTube channel later tomorrow, probably. So,
Oh.
and we will see you in a week, Robin.
Sounds good.
We're looking forward to it. So,
Yep.
Happy 4th of July, everybody.
Happy-
Be safe.
Thanks, same to all of you.
all right. Well, good night, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Adios.